All right, welcome back. So we were filling in this step 7 value that was halfway between 5 and 9. And again, I was using a number 2 pencil. Pardon me, not a number 2 pencil. I had a 2H pencil and or a 4H that those are our lightest pencils we have. And we were using those to try to keep this we don't want it to go too dark too quickly. So if I was going to go ahead and fill this in as far as that goes, I can use the 2H pencil to help me so that it fills in the values gently and it doesn't go too dark too quickly. Now the idea is we're supposed to be looking for a value that's halfway between these two, and it's just to help us to get to create a greater range of value. If I just started at the top and went down to the bottom, you know usually you're not going to have a full range, so we went with the darkest, lightest, then in between the lightest and darkest, and now in between the step 5 and the step 9. And this way we'll be able to target, at least be within range of a value step or half a step or something like that. We're still going to have to do a little bit of changing, making things a little darker, and of the two, and sometimes making them lighter. But of the two, as I may have mentioned before, it's easier if you're on the light side, because then you just have to get out a pencil and darken it down. If you go too dark, well then that's a little harder because you have to get an eraser, and you can lighten it with the eraser, but it's also, you got to be careful not to erase too much and have it become too splotchy, and it's going to get splotchy anyways, but I mean you're trying to control it as much as possible. And then you're still going to have to probably fill in lots of little splotches and take maybe as long as 20 minutes to get that all filled back in before you can actually start to modify it anymore. You have to make it uniform once again, because this illusion that we're going to create really depends on these values being as uniform and as just as flat as possible. In other words, we don't want a lot of variations or splotches, or look like there's texture. We don't want any. We want as little texture as possible to create this illusion. If we have too much texture, and we don't have a uniform value, it just won't work. And so I think we're about in the ballpark, as they say. It's a little lighter towards the middle, a little darker it's a little darker down here and a little lighter here, and more lighter in the middle. So I'm going to try to get this to be a little more uniform. So I'm going to come over here to the middle, and we're going to try to spend a little bit of time in the middle of this block trying to make the values much, again, more uniform. And we're pretty close. I mean, we're not way off, but we still need to do a little bit more. But again, when we're drawing a grayscale, when we're creating these values, the whole point is to not worry about detail. We're trying to just focus in on how light or how dark is it, and how uniform can I make it. That's the only two things that we are worried about. Now I grabbed a 4H, and again, the reason I'll use a 4H, it's the lightest pencil. The 4H pencil is the lightest pencil, and again, the reason I use it is because I can use it I can use it to very slowly make something darker and darker and darker until I have it at exactly the right value. Because of the fact it's so light, it takes like 4 times as long as the 2H to get to the same sort of point of darkness. And so because of that, I have a little more control over it. And we want that. We want to be able to control the values that we are creating with our pencils. Okay, so now this is almost perhaps a little dark, but we're gonna see how that goes. I'm not going to worry about it yet, but luckily this might be a little light. So again, we'll see it in just a moment. We're going to come down here to a step 3, and we're going to try to get a value that's in between those two, between this step and that step. And I'm going to start off with a 2B pencil, and the 2B is the second to the darkest. So the B we think of it as black. The higher the number, the darker the pencil, or the blacker the pencil. And so the B pencils are when we want something a little darker. But remember that the B pencils also, because of the fact that they are softer, that's why they are darker, because the graphite is a little softer. To harden graphite, they start mixing it with clay. The B pencils have less and less clay. They are far softer than the H pencils. And because of that, they ride over the texture of the paper. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Now, in terms of, I'm using a wrist swing, and I'm using a modified baton handhold. So pardon me, not a baton. Baton would be like this, between my fingers like this. With the tripod is like this, and so what I'm doing is it's sort of a modified tripod where I've brought this out of the crook of the my hand and holding it just at the end of my fingers. And again, I'm using a wrist swing I'm just trying to move this back and forth gently, and trying to be very careful in building this up. Trying to be very careful to make it as uniform as I possibly can. I'm also taking my eyes out of focus. Now, the first time I do this, I'm not trying to make it as dark as it can go the first layer. That would be unwise. So I'm going to very gently fill this in with value. Now, it's too light, but I'm going to go over this a couple more times. Remember, the more times we go over graphite, the darker that graphite will get. Unless, there's a range that every pencil has. And so sometimes you'll be like, well, the pencil's not getting any darker. Well, then you have to grab a darker pencil. So if I had an HB pencil and I was looking at it, I'm like, man, it's just not going any darker. Well, then I would grab a 2B. If the 2B wasn't doing what I needed to make it darker, I would then grab a 4B. All right. And if I had a full range of pencils, I could say, well, the 4B is not dark enough. Well, then I could grab a 6B. Now, or an 8B. The steps of darkness between a 4 to 6 to 8 are slight. And so, like I said, we can use just the 5 pencils to create values. And those 5 pencils, even most professional artists will use those 5 pencils. Some of them use only those pencils. And then others will use those 5 98 to 99% of the time. And so all those other pencils that you get in the kit, because there's 20 pencils or 21 pencils or something like that, if you get all the H's and the HB and the all the B pencils, you're going to have quite a collection. But because of the fact that most people only use the rest of those pencils, less than 1% of the time, some people don't buy all of them. They just like, look, I don't need them. I can make this work, and you can. But if you just need a pencil that's darker, well, you get a darker pencil. Same thing about a pencil needing to be lighter. If you're like, man, this is going too dark too quickly, grab a lighter pencil. So if I had the 2B pencil with me and I was like, man, this is getting too dark too quickly, well, then I would get the next lighter pencil, an HB. Now, if the HB was working, well, then great. But let's say the HB was also going too dark too quickly. And I'd say, well, okay, I'm going to go to the next lighter pencil, which would be a 2H. And so you want to get used to layering and working up and down the value scale. Now, I put about 3 layers of 2B pencil on here, and then I grabbed my 4H pencil. Again, that 4H pencil is to get deeper into the texture of this paper. It's to help us to, again, make it look more uniform. It also, because of the fact that it darkens this. Now, this is actually a finger swing I'm using now, because I'm trying to keep this nice crisp line, so I want it to be as clean or razor sharp, or I want it to be a nice good clean line both above and below. So again, I'm going to grab my pencil using that finger swing. Now, this isn't the tapered stroke or the feathered stroke or anything like this. This is just where I'm moving it back and forth with my fingers. It's the easier type of finger swing. Remember, the tapered stroke's a little bit more advanced, but we don't need something super sophisticated for what I'm doing right now. I just need to, work the pencil back and forth, and so I was just using a regular finger swing. If you don't understand the difference between just a normal finger swing and that tapered stroke and or feathered stroke, well, then I would encourage you to go back and watch the video that talks about how to create different values with different hand holds. Is it a wrist swing? Is it an elbow swing? Is it a finger swing? And then with the finger swing, there's either just a regular finger swing or the tapered stroke or feathered stroke. They're the same thing. They just go by different names. And it's just it's a lot more sophisticated. There's not really I mean, we could use it at this point, but for right now there's not a big need for it. So I just talked about that tapered stroke, and all of a sudden I sort of changed gears into doing that tapered stroke a little bit. But unless I ignore what I'm doing, you're not going to find a big difference. You're not going to see a huge difference. So I've gone over this a couple times with this 4H pencil. Now I've gone back to, now I'm using an elbow swing, and I'm just holding on to it with my fingers, locking my wrist, locking my fingers, and I'm just moving my elbow. Okay, so now we've got that where it's fairly uniform. So I'm going to go ahead and grab another pencil. So that was my 4H. So we went from a 2B up to a 4H. I've now got a 2H. So the 2H is the second lightest pencil. And I'm going to use a couple layers of that 2H. It again is going to fill in some of those little light dots that are from the texture of the paper, because this is a harder pencil. It gets deeper into the texture, and because those little dots become gray dots instead of white dots, it makes the whole thing appear darker. So it's getting darker not because this pencil is a dark pencil, but because we're getting rid of the textures in that paper. And that's a good thing to keep in mind. Now, there's times where you'll use the paper to help you. If I'm trying to create, like, let's say there's, again, this is a medium surface paper. It's got a nice texture to it. Let's say I was doing a felt hat, and so I want the texture of the felt, or something that approximates the texture in that hat. Well, then I might grab a 4B pencil because I want it to skip over the paper to reveal more of the texture. Okay, and I could certainly do that. There's, and I could just go ahead and again do that so that the value I was creating was actually revealing more of the paper texture. Therefore, the surface that I'm describing would feel more rough against smoother areas like this. And so there's times where we'll use the pencil differently to reveal texture. There's times we will, if I was working on chrome or something with very little texture, I want to try to minimize the texture as much as possible. I'm going to use a lot of those H pencils to get in there and take out the texture so that it looks more uniform, more smooth, because I'm minimizing the paper's texture at that point. And so we can use, again, the texture of the paper and to help us create the illusion of textures, different types of textures, which is really great when you're trying to draw, to create that. So again, this is the 2H. I've gone over this a couple times. Has a couple layers on there with my 2H pencil. I then am going to grab my 2B pencil again, and we're going to go back and forth and back and forth. And I'm trying to see, we're probably almost there. I think I'm probably about a half a step of value away. But now that we've done all that layering, this 2B pencil will look much darker when I layer it over all those other lighter pencils that I was using. So I started with my 2B, and then I grabbed a 4H, couple layers, then I grabbed a 2H, put on a couple layers, and HB, put on a couple of layers with that, and then I returned back to my 2B. At least I think I was supposed to grab the HB. I just realized I don't think I did, but if I had, it would just minimize just a little bit more of what was going on with those textures. So I think you can see now that we've done this, we're going to have every other step is going to be addressed or filled in, so I can start to try to associate the values of my drawing. Now I'm using a finger swing again because I'm being a little bit more, I want a little bit more control as I put in my values. Again, I'm going to go ahead and I should probably say that, because what we're going to do is I'm going to finish this, and then I'm going to go ahead and turn this off, because I don't think you need to sit here, and you can imagine that this is, it's going to be more of the same, because I want to fill this all in, because that's not the stopping point, that's about the halfway point. So I think it's important to do that. I'm going a little bit some different directions to try to, again, minimize some of that paper, the grain created by if we leave spaces between our lines. So that's important to make sure that we, that can really help unify, make the value look more uniform, which is what we want. Again, not bad. I think I'm going to grab the HB pencil. Like I said, I can't remember if I used this one. I think I might have actually skipped it. But the reason why is that 2B is going to go darker much more quickly. So if I grab a slightly lighter pencil like this HB, well, then I have a little more control. So I'll be able to darken it in a much, with a lot more care, because I have what's the term I'm looking for? Basically, because of the fact that it takes longer to darken it, I don't have to worry about one little misstep. With a 2B, I could put just one stroke and go, oh no, too dark, I ruined it. So this one, I'd have to go over 3 or 4 or 5 times to make it too dark. And so again, I'm going to use it to just very gently darken things very softly, and because I'm going to have to work it a little bit longer, I've got time, no big deal, I'm going to have more control over this. So again, I'm going some different directions, trying to get rid of the grain. I'm taking my eye out of focus to see if this is what the value is. Because again, so when we first do this, sometimes we get so distracted by the textures that we can't see the value that we've created because we're just so focused on the texture. And so again, I'm going to take my eyes out of focus and try to, again, perceive what this is in relationship to this and this. Now, for the most part, I'm going to write this down. So for this one, we used mostly a 4H. I might have used a little bit of a 2H. Maybe I'll actually use a pencil where we can see what I'm writing. So for this one, we used the 4H and then maybe the 2H for this one. I could use just the 4H. Sometimes I'll use a 4H and a 2H for the number 9. But again, the two lightest pencils. For something like this, it's going to again be the 4H and maybe the 2H. That little symbol means and so that's the 2H. For this one, again, I might use the 2H and an HB. I also might use a 4H if I figure I need to. If there was an area I was trying to very gently make darker, I could certainly do that. But I'm going to say most of it's going to be 2H pencil with a little bit of HB. This would be the same. This would be an HB and then a 2H and maybe a 4H. Layering. So again, because as that HB is going to start to allow, and you're going to see more of that texture showing through, and we use these two H pencils to basically get rid of some of that texture. Again, for this one would be mostly the HB with and HB and then maybe the 4H and then the 2H. With this one, for number 4, we'd be using the 2B, and then we would also we would then jump up to the 4H, then a 2H, then an HB, and then we'd return to the 2B once again. There might be a point where I go, okay, now I need to darken it to the right darkness, and so I would ditch the 2B and use either an HB or 2H to darken that and very slowly get it to where I want. For this one here, again, we would use a 2B, and then we jump up to the 4H, and then a 2H, and then an HB, right? And there might be a point where I might even use a little bit of the 4B in here. It just depends on whether it's dark enough. So again, I'm going to use my eyes. On this one, again, we'd start off with probably a 4B. Then we would jump up to a 4H. Then we'd put a couple layers of the 2H, a couple layers of the HB, the 2B, and then we might return to the 4B. If it's getting too dark too quickly, I'd stay with the 2B. Or if I was really needing to sort of push it down just a little bit in terms of its darkness, I might jump up to an HB or even a 2H. And then this one, again, we start off with the 4B for the number 1. Then we jumped up to the 4H to get rid of those little specks, and then we also used a 2H to get rid of some of the specks, and then an HB, and then a 2B. And then we returned back with the 4B to push this down as far as we could go in terms of the value. So the number step 9 was 4H and 2H. Step 8 was 4H and 2H. Step 7, now I could use a 4H with that, but again, it's going to probably need to go a little darker, so I'm going to need a 2H, and I'm probably going to need a little bit of an HB. I'd probably start this in with a 2H, and then maybe go over with an HB, and then return to using a 2H. With this one, I'd probably start again with the 2H or the HB, depending on the manufacturer. Some HBs are slightly darker, some 2Hs are slightly lighter. But I would start with either the HB or the 2H, put a layer. If I start with the HB, well, then I'd jump up there with a 4H, get rid of the little specks. Then I'd use a 2H, and I might use that 2H to push it down as far as I need to go. So again, this is what we're going to use. So again, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill these in using these ideas. And I'm going to come back with this thing filled in, and then we're going to actually, that's where the fun begins, because we're not even halfway there yet. We're going to go ahead and fill these in, and then we'll be halfway there. And again, I didn't think that you would want to sit here and watch me do this for 30 minutes, because it's going to be basically the exact same thing that I was doing with these guys, except this is going to be a step of value between those two. This will be a step of value between those two. That's a step of value between those two. You see where we're going. So I'm going to go ahead and fill these in very gently. Now I'm going to make sure that when it hits that line, I have to make sure, and in fact this one's it's not very crisp and clean, so I need to come in there and clean that up. And I would do, whenever I do cleaning up, unless it's really dark down here, the ones up here I'd use 2 H's and 4 H's. If they're down here I'd be using 2 B's or 4 B's, maybe an HB, but again, lighter pencils up here, darker pencils down here. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and fill this in, and we're going to come back, and then we're going to finish this up. Alright?